Welcome to Designless. My name is Zane.
This is Tim.
And welcome to our episode 1 of our podcast. I am a designer and I've studied engineering in my undergrad.
I am an instructor, but I also work in tech and have kind of bounced back and forth between automotive and aerospace for years.
Yeah, and Tim and I have worked together on a couple projects, but we definitely have these conversations all the time about what's the latest in technology. I think we're both very excited about it, and we thought it'd be really great to share some of our ideas and seeing what is real and what is not real in the field. You know, one thing that we talk a lot about is augmented reality, right? How's that going to play a role in our future, and what is it really going to look like? And there's definitely a lot happening right now, but no one really knows. And I think a lot of the question goes into what is the killer app, right? Like, what is the way that it's going to really change our lives? And no one really knows for sure yet.
And one of the reasons we talk about this is Zane's working on his thesis, which has to do with this. And I worked for an augmented reality company for a few years, actually creating physical optics for augmented reality wearables.
Yeah.
So, you know, we have a bit of a background, the both of us, in this technology.
And what's really exciting is many of you probably also have a background in it. If you haven't noticed already on your phones, there's a lot of these augmented reality applications starting to show their way into all of our day-to-day lives. And I think we all recognize that it's going to play a part one way or another, right? There's a lot of discussion about like Apple's next-gen AR glasses, which is, you know, AR, augmented reality, or Google and their Google Glass. But what is that really going to look like to you, Tim?
Well, so for me, whenever anybody starts talking about augmented reality, I really start thinking, like, is it really augmenting my reality? Or is it like Pokemon Go or something that's like, you know, I'm just throwing an image on top of reality? For me, augmented reality really comes down to, am I getting some experience out of a device or an app that I wouldn't have otherwise? So, you know, typically that involves other sensors that are not just my eyes, not just like a typical camera on a phone. You know, I want real augmented reality.
Yeah, and so I've been thinking a lot about this recently as well, working on my thesis. And I think a lot of the work that we've seen in the world today about augmented reality is really just taking the existing user interfaces that we're familiar with and just putting it as a visual in front of our faces. And that, to us, isn't necessarily what augmented reality should be. I think what Tim and I are kind of hinting at is augmented reality is about placing experiences into our day-to-day lives that you may not be able to discern as a digital interface. It just blends right in and it really showcases that experience. So imagine walking on a street and seeing information that's through a person, through a sign, and you can't tell if that's a real sign or not. But that's the information, right? And I think that's where the future for me is, where augmented reality sits.
So as professionals in augmented reality, often we kind of would find each other on LinkedIn or whatever, and we'd kind of reach out to each other and we'd meet and talk. And there was one guy that I met one time who he was working on color and materials for a very well-known augmented reality company that I'm sure anybody who's in the industry knows about. And he used to call them face computers, kind of jokingly, right? Because that's like one of the least attractive things you could think of. But it's like, yeah, it's a computer that is stuck to your face. And I think that is where most augmented reality is right now. It's glasses that have some sort of a menu on your face. And that's not necessarily ideal from a UI standpoint. It leads to weird interactions of like, how do I select that menu? How do I scroll through that menu? How do I see things that I actually want to see? Because I don't really want to look. Nobody really wants to look at a menu ever. Like you really want to be looking at the world around you and interacting with the world around you, not some crazy group of menus.
Yeah, you want it to just work, right? And I think, sadly, the reality is we are going to have to start with face computers, right? Technology doesn't evolve that quickly. But I think as designers, our approach is to look at what we want to see, the perfect ideal situation. And Tim's hinting at it, which is, in a perfect world, things would just work, right? They kind of blend in, and when you need it, it comes around, and when you don't, it's not there. And it certainly should not be this heavy, complex interface that you have to run through tons of menus, and who knows how many gestures you have to look up.
Or memorizing new forms of gestures to actually get. I mean, that's basically the Newton, right? I mean, that was the thing that killed the Newton, is you had to learn these gestures to be able to interact with the computer.
And there's tons of errors that run around.
Yeah, well, and anything that requires like hours of learning is just not intuitive. It's not what you want.
Yeah, I mean, something that I've been really looking into recently is this idea of natural interfaces, right? What it means is, we have user interfaces. They're made of things that we're familiar with from our phones, but a natural interface is something that you can't tell is there. It's such a natural part of our behavior. We don't need to learn something. And I think something that interfaces are trying to become in recent years is some more realistic, more easy to learn, right? And augmented reality is going to be a big focal point of that. There's a lot of discussion on using gestures or like some kind of eye tracking, but none of these are natural. And when we're talking about general mainstream consumers, I don't see many people really wanting to interact that way.
Yeah. So maybe jump out for just a minute. About 5 years ago, there was this huge push for augmented reality, and there were a number of companies that grew up. They got a lot of funding. Magic Leap was one of them that got many billions of dollars. Daiquiri was one of them that had multiple billions of dollars of investment. And there's probably 6 or 7 others that popped up around that same time, and a few well-known companies popped up, and it was specifically because the technology had gotten to a point where you could actually put these computers on people's faces and interact with them, and you could see the real world and see digital content at the same time. But I think what's crazy about that is, even though that was a leap forward from where we were, before that 5-year mark, the technology currently isn't at a point where you actually can get an experience that is any good, because all of the back-end technology necessary to drive those interfaces on your screen, on your face,
super bulky, right?
Are huge. And then there's a bunch of sensors that need to go along with that, and processors and battery packs. And as soon as you have these devices all running, they're just so heavy that yes, you can wear them. And yes, they are possible. Microsoft did make, a very amazing product, but it still isn't comfortable.
You're strapping an entire computer onto your back, pretty much. You're not really, it's not blending into your day-to-day like a wearable, like an Apple Watch is right now.
Yeah, so like the HoloLens, it isn't, something that's big enough that you're wearing it on your back. That was kind of the leap forward, but it is still big enough that when you're trying to balance it on your head, you probably can't wear it for more than an hour without getting pretty uncomfortable.
For anyone who hasn't worn a HoloLens, if you wear for an extended amount of time, and that, it could be an hour, it could be less than an hour, you get hot, you get sweaty, and your head starts to hurt, right? These things, they don't sit like a pair of glasses do, even though we call them glasses. They sit more like a giant cap that surrounds the entire face, and they're heavy, and, there's a lot of technology that goes into it. So we're not quite there yet. And I think that's part of the excitement and interest in this topic, is that we see where it's going to be in a couple of years, right? We as technologists, we understand how technology will evolve. But right now, it's not presenting the value to the mainstream consumer. And I think a lot of, TV shows, movies will showcase what it can be, and that's what we're trying to aim for. But we're hoping that companies don't sell these out too early, right? If you bring a product to market too soon, you get experiences that the mainstream consumer doesn't understand.
Well, and I think that is also playing out in the market. You can see that all of these companies are currently, even though some of them have released products, some of them haven't released products, but all of them are facing some sort of financial duress because they haven't been able to make a product that people actually want to buy, because the tech really isn't living up to all of the hype that it got about 5 years ago or since.
Yeah, I think something that I ask myself all the time is this question of, at what point is the technology ready for the consumer, right? Does it have to be perfectly small, light glasses? I don't think that's necessarily true, but it has to provide an actual value, and whether that's who you're targeting, right? Like, is it the consumer, the general consumer, or is it a particular industry?
Yeah, so basically all they need to do is find that one killer app. What is the human need that it solves that costs about $5,000 to $10,000. Like, it's something that it needs to be able to make a $10,000 worth of benefit in my life for me to spend that kind of money. And yeah, maybe it's an industry. There's a lot of talk around the oil and gas industry that you could provide these computers and replace some of these high paid employees that need to kind of fly around the world to fix certain things.
Telecommunication, right, and manufacturing tend to be the most popular topics where AR has been shown in industry. I'm not sure those are necessarily the killer apps.
They aren't.
Right.
Because those companies, they all tried to go that route and have not been successful in actually creating a product that did that.
And I saw this really interesting because there's a white paper out recently. They were talking about adoption of like new technologies, right? And traditionally it's been enterprise, right? Enterprise has the money, the power, and the needs, the specific technical needs to use these devices. But the trend that has happened in the last couple of years with the iPhone especially is bring your own device, is what they called it, right? Consumers are now bringing their own devices. They're actually more actively jumping onto technology, whereas enterprise is slower, like, software. You might be still running Windows 7 on your computer, and that's just because enterprise is slower in that sense. So there's actually the trend of moving towards consumers driving the technology market. So it's not about finding this enterprise use case. It's what do consumers want? And the technology almost gets tested by consumers before it reaches enterprise.
Well, I can go out on a limb here and say that there's two areas where design could really make a difference in this market. One is it seems like all of these companies are either coming at this from a hardware standpoint or a software standpoint, but not necessarily from a hardware and software or like a complete user experience standpoint. So, for instance, when the first Apple computers were released, they were released with a suite of software. So you had this amazing new hardware, and you also had the software that would immediately, out of the box, be able to solve human needs. You had a computer that had a word processor, a small drawing program, and a calculating program. Those were things that people needed, and it was a massive step up from the even the advanced typewriters that they had at the time. So, immediately it was better than what was out there. So I feel like with augmented reality, somehow there needs to be this complete user experience that is built from both, the hardware and software. And I think designers are in a perfect position to be able to look for what kinds of markets those devices could go into and solve problems.
That actually reminds me of this book that I've been reading. It's called Creative Selection, and it's about one of the designers, and he's technically a programmer, but also a designer of the original iPhone's keyboard, for example. That's something he talks a lot about. And part of that thing that's really interesting about it is their focus, right? At Apple, and the story that he tells is that they're not just exploring different ideas of what is a touchscreen do. They have a very specific target in mind in their process. And that's what he called creative selection, is being able to pinpoint a specific goal and setting all your work to target that. And that helps one to simplify the process. And I think this applies to designers, engineers, everyone. Is knowing what you're trying to do right from the very beginning. You're not just aimlessly exploring and then spreading yourself too thin. And he talks about it, and it's interesting because if you look at the original iPhone, right, there were tons of phones already on the market that had many features like video recording, front camera. The iPhone didn't have any of these. It didn't have an app store, but it did a couple of things that were almost standard. They weren't new necessarily, but they did it really, really well. And then eventually they grew that market and that experience. And I think augmented reality is in the same space, right? It doesn't need to radically innovate an entire space. It just needs to find particular applications and really, really solve them for what they're good at. And I think designers have a great opportunity to do that because they're in this space where they can think and imagine in these wild ways.
So you had asked me about this contact company. Let's talk a little bit about what was the name of that company?
So it's a company called Mojo Vision, and it came out as secret mode at CES 2020 this year. And what they're really doing is building contact lenses that have a way to project images straight into your iris. And so augmented reality directly on your face, more hidden, more invisible than any other device we've seen yet.
So there's a lot of excitement around this technology right now, and they have a lot of videos out talking about what they're capable of doing and how real they are. This didn't sound super new to me. I mean, this was something that Google actually worked on a few years ago, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of companies are talking about this idea of truly invisible AR, right?
Yeah. So what I think that they are bringing to the market that is new is they have this new microdisplay that is actually on the contact lens, and in their video they actually talk about wearing this on a regular basis, and that it has so many pixels and it's like the display is so super dense, and that they have figured out ways of charging it and being able to drive information into the lens. What I saw when I watched the video and kind of was reading through the lines or between the lines was that there's a few technologies there that they haven't figured out yet, that keep it actually from being very useful at all right now. Now, that doesn't mean to say that they won't be able to work them out and that the funding that they're getting now won't help them to solve this problem and move it forward. But one of the things that I saw was they don't have what I call push-pull lenses. Mm-hmm. So the idea is, if you put a very high-powered screen onto a contact and then stick that contact into your eye, you actually can't see anything on that screen. You'll see lights, you'll see blurry moving things maybe, but what you won't see is what we all would expect to see from a user interface. The reason I know this is because when we were designing these, basically your eye has the ability to see about 6 to 8 inches away. And anything closer, the older you get, of course, it's a lot less. But if anything closer, your eye just can't distinguish it as a focal point.
No, I think it's a really easy way for you to kind of demonstrate to yourself is take out your cell phone, put it on an image, and put it right next to your face, right? And you're going to see that you're not going to be able to focus in on that. It's almost like when you're taking a photo with a nice camera, right? You can't focus on things really close because we all need that depth, right? We're naturally seeing depth. But when you place even if it's a transparent screen like this contact lenses right next to your eye, unless there's some other technology in place.
Right. So what we would typically do at the company that I worked for is we had 2 sets of lenses. We had one set of lenses that would actually push the surroundings closer to your eye, and then you would have the screen mounted kind of after that lens, and then you have another lens that kind of pushes everything back out into the world. And so what that does, it kind of takes the digital content and it puts the world around you more on a focal plane that is more closely related to each other. And usually we would pick somewhere arbitrarily like 10 inches away from your face. That would be the focal point. That would be something that would be comfortable for most people and also very visible. And that reduces eye strain as well. So that's one way to solve it. But if you have a contact lens, basically all those lenses are doing is magnifying distance, right? And so if your distance is less than a millimeter, you're going to have to magnify it a lot to get it out 10 inches.
So to clarify for users who might be listening to this is what you're really saying is it's just bouncing light through a bunch of mirrors, right? To create a sense of depth in something that may not actually have the space to showcase. And is that called periscoping? Is that what the terminology is? I
don't know exactly what the proper terminology is. I worked with a number of optical engineers and we always tried to dumb down the terminology because they can definitely outweigh me in terminology. But the idea is it's just like wearing a pair of glasses or using a camera. Inside a camera's lenses, they have a stack of lenses that either push the world further away or bring it closer. And, these optical characteristics are based on physics, right? That's not a technological innovation.
There are physical limitations to what you can do with your eyes.
Yeah, it's just what light waves do and what your eye can do.
What's amazing about that is even a couple of years ago, we said that certain phones couldn't do, a zoom of a certain extent because you needed that many lenses, right? It was not physically possible. But then this year, I believe Samsung just released their S20 Ultra, right? Which has like a 100 times zoom, right? I think that's the number. And they're using that kind of process, right? A bunch of mirrors that they call a periscoping lens that allows them to zoom at this extent. And it's on a smartphone, right? So just a couple of years and you're doing things. And so, we're saying this because if you look at augmented reality and contact lenses, we say that right now, this technology seems insane.
Yeah. But, okay. So it is technology based. I mean, if we're going to be super honest, yes, in the end, all of these lenses are based on basically running processes in a computer to optimize the lens. And so, technology may get to a point where you can actually prototype the lens appropriately and actually get the lens stacks closer and tighter. But at some point there is a limit. Some point. So,
until we find another way to do it, right?
yeah, right. I mean, yeah, and humans are incredibly innovative, and we will find a way to do whatever it is we want to do.
But I guess the point that we're saying right now is we're looking at what they demonstrated at CES, Mojo Vision. We don't know if they're solving this problem yet, right? Like they probably could solve this problem.
They didn't address it in anything that they brought out. I'm sure they know it. I mean, you have to.
Yeah.
If they said that they've put the contact in their eyeball and they've worn it, which they did say, then clearly they're like, oh wait, we need to solve this problem somehow. Yeah. One of the other ones that they talked about, that they didn't talk about, but I noticed, was that if you're pushing large amounts of data at a high frame rate to a very high
sensitivity part of your face.
Yeah, well, I wasn't going to go there yet, but I was going to say a very detailed screen. Then you have to have some sort of pipeline to get the information to the lens to be able to have a refresh rate that is what we would expect. Like, if you're watching video or if you're watching any kind of content, it has a very, very high refresh rate. That requires some very large pipes, right? Wires. So on the lenses that we used, 1080p, you need to have a pretty big processor fairly close to that display to be able to get the information to the display quickly enough without latency. So if you're trying to do that wirelessly, right next to your eyeball, like, I don't know exactly how you do that. There's going to be heat involved in that. And is that dangerous? Isn't it dangerous? That definitely is something that technology will overcome. Yeah. But I don't know that we're there yet.
Right. It's like, let's say, even hypothetically, if it wasn't dangerous, just think about battery life, right? We have enough trouble powering our phones today. Think about how small a contact lens is. And then the fact that you don't really want to put a battery that close to your eye. Mm-hmm. How much, is this thing going to last like a second before it dies?
Well, I mean, they might have induction charging, right? Like if you had a frame around your eye, like a pair of glasses that had an induction charger, you could, in theory, power the contact lens through some sort of near-field induction charging.
And I just can't imagine people being okay with that right now.
Well, you still have to question whether that's a wise thing to do, or like what does that do to the skin around your eyes?
It's like as a designer, we think about this all the time. It's not a can technology or science allow us to do this. It is, do humans want this, even if you make it, right? And that's a really important question to ask, because yes, you can make it work, but if no one buys it, is it really a product? And I don't think that is, right? A product is something that someone experiences at the end of the day.
Well, and also, again, you're talking about the battery size, so you're going to need a pretty big battery. Anything that has a lot of processing power and a lot of energy being used to put a lot of data through a very large pipe is going to take a pretty big battery. Mm-hmm. So where do you put that battery, and how does that thing power itself? I think the better route, kind of just totally changing direction right now, a better route to go is if you actually looked at what Google Glass was. Google Glass was basically a smartwatch stuck to your eye. And I think that created a lot of waves just as it was. But it did start to serve a purpose. And it was small enough and light enough, and the battery power, all the things kind of stacked up to something that people would not mind wearing on their face.
Besides the privacy discussion.
Well, that was what other people were worried about, right? Like the people wearing it were okay with the device. It was the other people that weren't wearing it that weren't okay with the device.
I actually had an interesting conversation about this with someone recently. It was the same thing. It was like, who are you selling this product to, right? Mm-hmm. Is it the person wearing it, or is it to everyone that's around you? And so, I think it's easy to say, yeah, you're just selling it to the person wearing it. So if they don't care, then it doesn't matter. But I actually argued, that it's important to look at everyone else around you as well, because they're your target audience too, right? If you can't make people around you comfortable with this technology, then why would they buy it? And if they don't buy it, then this market just doesn't grow. And a lot of technology is about community, right? How do people interact with each other? And if you look into the general population, oftentimes it's driven by this, oh, my friend has this. They told me about this, so I want to use this. But if it stops dead right at the very beginning because people are uncomfortable, I think you're cutting yourself short very quickly, and you're selling just to a very niche market. And I'm not saying that Google Glass is always doomed to fail, but at the time, and at least the way they marketed it, it struggled with that one fast. I think that was one of the biggest challenges that they faced. And even today, we've become much more comfortable with voice activated devices, cameras everywhere. Like, we don't even question our phones at all, right? So it's just a timing thing at the end of the day, and how you train the audience. It sounds terrible to say train, but that's what we're doing.
I guess so. The Google Glass Backlash was one of the things that I was super confused about. It was one of those things that I guess kind of made me feel like maybe I'm not the average consumer. I mean,
we are not the average
I guess
consumer.
I'm not. But it made me feel very isolated in the sense that everybody's been carrying around cameras in their pockets for how many decades already? And now all of a sudden people are worried about privacy. Like, that, I thought that thing that ship sailed a long time ago. I don't know. But, clearly there were some people that still felt like that the Google Glass was some sort of step in a direction that made them feel less comfortable than they were before.
I think we can't look at pure reason when it comes to consumers, right?
Clearly.
And so, like, part of my thesis has been in interviewing a lot of individuals about these, next generation devices, voice driven, so like Siri, or you're having a Amazon Echo or such, right? And if you talk to a lot of people about this, they'll mention how uncomfortable they are about voice systems because it's constant listening, right? And I'll go, well, what about the voice on your phone? It's the same exact device. For anyone who knows the technical aspects, it runs the same server on the same back end. But for some reason, just because it's in a speaker, a lot of people are uncomfortable, like, I would never do this. But they're okay with their phone, right? And I'm like, why? And they're like...
And how was there no backlash for the Amazon Echo, though? I mean...
There is tons of backlash.
Well, not the same as Google Glass. I mean, all of a sudden, Google Glass was like on everybody's newscast. Everybody was talking about how terrible it was. I mean, the whole idea of glass holes came out. Like, I mean, it was like a huge deal. And I remember this kind of idea that we had somehow stepped into 1984. But then Amazon Echo is literally what was talked about in
Now, we're not hating on Amazon. We're just saying that there's backlash that's available.
I'm not hating on any of this stuff. I'm just trying to understand people. And in the end, that's what I think is fascinating. Because at some point, I'm going to be introducing devices that I don't want to receive the same kind of press that the Google Glass got.
Well, so one thing that I found in my research was that if you really ask the question, like, what's the difference between a phone and a smart speaker or a Google Glass, the answer is, I guess I'm just comfortable with my phone. And you're like, why? And they have had it for a long time. They don't think about it anymore. They value the benefits of the phone so much that they don't even think about the small pain points, right? And that's really the key, I think, in all of this is, in any device that comes out, a company that creates it has to provide a value to customers that's so strong and so obvious that they're willing to accept imperfections, right? Because nothing's truly perfect for every person out there.
They're willing to accept any invasion of privacy that it may
But
create.
it's the truth, right? If you think about it, we joke about it, but it's like, yeah, totally. We were giving away our data to Google Maps. We're giving away our information to Amazon Echo.
Yeah.
But the second you provide that value, people are comfortable. So when we're talking about AR, for example, it's going to perhaps require more data, right? Anything that is personalized requires data. But if a company is able to present it in a way that generates value to these users, then maybe you can convince them, right? And so maybe the part about Google Glass was, at the time when they were releasing it, it was really a phone strapped to your face, right? It didn't generate a new value. Mm-hmm. But if AR isn't just a phone to your face, it was something more than that. If it was an experience that really blended your experience to make it easier, that's a value. And from that, people may be willing to accept this new computer on your face.
Yeah, I think the idea of these artificial intelligence voice assistants, voice activated assistants, I think that really is the connection that augmented reality is missing. I mean, I would say that they make more of an impact augmenting my reality than many of the augmented reality devices that are out on the market. And to be able to actually get rid of the user interfaces that we are putting into these devices, you do need some sort of a artificial intelligence that can actually sort through what's going on in your environment and actually only provide you relevant choices, or the most relevant choices. And I think that is one of the ways to create augmented reality devices that are They help you engage reality more, and actually do augment your reality more instead of
They don't intrude.
Yeah, instead of just pulling you out of reality.
Yeah. Well, I think from all the examples that I've seen in AR, and I'm sure there's some secret lab not doing this, but from everything that I've seen, the problem is that they're really just taking the existing interface and strapping it to your face, right? They're just taking your phone's UI and putting it right there in front of your face. And that's not it. I think the reality is it has to blend in. It has to be non-intrusive. And that's when because you can't be just taking the same existing design philosophy and applying it to this new experience. You have to think about it in new ways, right? When they designed the touchscreen and the iPhone, they didn't take the computer and strap it to your phone. So I think once again, we're at the stage in design where we have to really ask, like, what are the ways we want to interact? And has technology caught up to the point where we can actually enable these things? That's probably the biggest challenge, right? Is can technology actually enable the designer's visions? Mm-hmm. And I think we're getting there. I think we are starting to see some of the technology come together to enable these ideas. And I'm really looking forward to what we can do with that. And, part of my own job is imagining this stuff.
Yeah. So let's wrap it up. But I think the takeaways are augmented reality. We need to actually figure out what this thing actually does. What's it good for? How can we actually solve human needs? And how do we make it work as seamlessly and transparently as possible?
I think we're talking about a lot of this, how does the technology and the design come together? And so that really showcases that design, engineering, all the sciences, everything comes together. We have to work together to make this happen. It's not one or the other.
Yeah, and in the end, it's driven by humans, right? It's not like, oh, we have this really great technology, and then all of a sudden it's successful. It's humans have this really great problem that somehow this technology solved.
Yeah. I think if it's not obvious enough, Tim and I are really excited about augmented reality. We talked a lot about these points that we think need to be fixed or need to be looked at in more detail, but that's because we really want to see it succeed.
And I think it will. It just maybe hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, maybe someone out there is going to find out the killer app that we're talking about. Thank you for listening to episode 1 of Designless.
And we hope to do an episode 2 that is better than this one.
Absolutely. All right.